Greetings, booktubers. Welcome back to Grammaticus Books. Today we're talking about the Icelandic sagas, and in particular, we're going to talk about three of the most popular: Hrolf Kraki Saga, Njal Saga, and my personal favorite, which is Egil Saga, about Egil Skallagrimsson, a Viking back in Norse times. So what are the Icelandic sagas? These were sagas that were written down in the 1200s, mostly in Iceland, dealing with the Norse peoples and their culture and their history. And by that, what I really mean is they're talking about the Vikings. This is a history of the Vikings from the 600s and the 800s. And these stories were passed on through oral tradition from when they happened, when these people were actually living, all the way up until when they were recorded in writing in the 1200s. And life back then was a very grim, dark, brutal, and short affair. And that is definitely reflected in these stories. So we're going to go through these three stories: Hrolf Kraki, Njal's, and Egil Saga. And at the end of Egil Saga, I'm going to read a poem out of Egil Saga. So I know it's going to be the Grammaticus Books Poetry Hour, but I'm sticking that all the way at the end. So if you don't want to listen to Grammaticus read poetry, you can cut that part off at the end, but I would implore you to give it a chance. This is my favorite poem of all time, hands down. I love this poem. It's fantastic. It was written by Egil Skallagrimsson himself. It has literary and historical significance, and it's a fantastic poem about Vikings in battle. I think you'll enjoy it. If you enjoy it half as much as I do, you'll like it. So please give it a chance. So anyway, we're starting off with Hrolf Kraki Saga by Paul Anderson, published in 1973. Nice little wraparound cover there from Ballantine Books. So what is that? 1973? I thought these were written in the 1200s. They were. This is Paul Anderson. Here's another version of it from Bain Books. This is Paul Anderson taking the original saga of Hrolf Kraki and then translating it into a more modern lexicon so that it's more easily readable by a modern audience. And he does a fantastic job. So Hrolf Kraki is the story of King Hrolf Kraki of Denmark, and it's the Daneland's most famous semi-historical legendary king. And this just traces his path to the kingdom. And the highlight of this book is when Hrolf Kraki hires 12 berserkers, takes them into the hall of his main rival, and then he uses these berserkers in battle in order to launch himself into the kingship of Denmark. And it's a fantastic story. One quick note on berserkers. Berserkers were some of the best warriors that you could have by your side in battle. They were the most fierce, demonically possessed, would just carve a path to their enemies, and you really wanted them on your side in a fight. But outside of battle, they were not considered good people to have around, or people you wanted to associate with. They were sort of mad and had one of their feet planted in the world of demons and the underworld, and they weren't considered honorable to use, which is kind of a factor in play with this saga with Hrolf Kraki. The fact that he hires 12 berserkers to help him gain the kingdom and the kingship. But that's the first one, Hrolf Kraki Saga. It's very good. I would recommend reading this version, Paul Anderson's version, versus the original. You're going to be able to digest this one a little better. So that takes us to number 2. Get a quick drink of Coke there. Number 2 is Njal Saga. And Njal Saga is the longest of the Icelandic sagas. It's also considered the peak of the form, and it's tracing the history of Njal and Gunnar, who are two sort of opposing figures. One is very scholarly. He's a lawyer and a sage, and the other, Gunnar, is a warrior. It's a very long Icelandic saga. It's very difficult to get through. I have read it. It was a while back. The best part of Njal's saga is the death of Gunnar. So Gunnar is the hero. He's a warrior hero, and he marries the most beautiful woman in all of Norway. She's just stunningly beautiful, long golden blonde hair, but she's a pot stirrer. She spends all her time going out, stirring up blood feuds and starting fights to the death and causing Gunnar to have to fight these blood feuds. So she'd have to be beautiful, right? If she's going to cause that much trouble, stir the pot that thoroughly and get all these feuds going, you would hope that she would be just stunningly beautiful, and she is. And she's known for her long golden hair. So years before Gunnar's death, his wife, she goes, and during a time of famine, she goes into a farm of a neighbor and she steals food from this neighbor's farm. And Gunnar finds out about it and he slaps her because he's so upset that she's committed this breach of honor. And his wife never forgets this. So she stirs up this final feud. She gets Gunnar into a feud with this very powerful enemy, and they come to kill Gunnar when he's by himself, just him and his wife, in their homestead, and they come in droves. And Gunnar is a famous bowman, and he has his bow, and he's on the second floor of his homestead, and he's firing his bow down into his enemies, and he's holding them at bay and killing them, and he's going to be able to survive this attack, except that his bowstring breaks in the middle of the battle. And he turns to his wife, and he asks his wife to give him a couple of her golden hairs so that he can use them to repair his bowstring. And she refuses because she's still salty about the slap from years earlier. And so Gunnar, with his sense of honor, even though he could easily take the hairs from her, refuses to sully his honor and instead draws his sword and goes down and meets his enemies face to face, where they overwhelm him and they kill him. And it's sort of the peak and the epitome of what these stories are about, which is family, honor, and feuds. And it's a great ending to Gunnar's story there in Njal's Saga, and I really like it. That's a difficult one to get through. It's very lengthy, but that portion of it is very worthwhile. I might recommend just going to and reading about Gunnar's death. So that's number 2. So that brings us to the third one in our entry, which is my favorite, which is Egil's Saga. This is a Penguin classic. I had to read this for a German class at a German professor, and this is absolutely my favorite one. Egil is a Viking, and he's an anti-hero. He's an immense human being. He's one of the most formidable warriors of the day. He's a huge man. He is ugly as sin, dark hair, dark complexion, dark demeanor and manner. He's in things for himself. He is not a good person. And he's also a poet, and he's a bit of a magician. So in other words, there is a heck of a lot of him in Karl Edward Wagner's Cain the Mystic Swordsman. I don't know how much this was influenced by Karl Edward Wagner, how much influence this had, but I suspect quite a bit, because all these authors, Tolkien, Karl Edward Wagner, Michael Moorcock, Lynn Carter, Elspeth de Camp, they all read these novels heavily. They influenced them tremendously, which is another reason why they're important. They had literary historical significance, and they've had just a tremendous influence in our modern fantasy authors. And I think this one heavily influenced Karl Edward Wagner and his Cain character. So this is the story following Egil through his exploits as a Viking up until his death. And I'll just read you a quick description of Egil on the back. A panoramic view of the Viking world from the middle of the 9th century to the middle of the 10th. Wide-ranging though it is through time and space, the saga is dominated throughout by the demonic presence of its hero, Egil Skallagrim's son, and the influence of his god, the many-faced Odin, shape-changer and rune master. Of enormous physical strength with something of the troll in his nature, Egil is by turns killer, drunkard, miser, poet, wanderer, farmer, lawyer, and sorcerer. Merciless and vengeful, he is also capable of great loyalty and great delicacy of feeling. So that's the description of him on there, and it gives you a good picture of him. But it also talks about Odin. And one of the big themes running through Egil's Saga is the gods and the people who follow them, and the split between the followers of Odin and the followers of Thor. So Egil is a follower of Odin, and Odin is the god of war, and he's also the god of poets and magic. And poetry and magic were tied together in the Norse minds back in the 600s and the 800s. Poets had, and through their poems, a form of magic where they could influence people, they could build people up and make them greater or tear them down with their poems. And these poems were almost like spells, and they were actually tangible things that were worth value, that you could trade these poems. And in the end, Egil trades a poem. He creates a poem that saves his life, the Head Ransom poem, where he sings the praises of Eric the Red in England. And that's the poem I'll read to you guys, and it's fantastic. So you have Odin, who's a very dark god. He's the god of poets, he's the god of magic, and he's the god of cunning. And then you have Thor, who's a very bright god. He is the god of leaders, the god of thunder, the god of honor. He's very tall, he's very brightly clad. He has long blonde or golden red hair in the tails, but he's not the sharpest god in the tool drawer. He's not the sharpest guy. And so the followers of Thor tend to be these very charismatic, very bright leaders, but not very bright guys. And then you have the followers of Odin, who are terrific warriors, powerful. The berserkers follow Odin, and they're very cunning, but they're not good people, and they're not the best leaders. And Egil definitely falls in the latter. So that was one of the big themes that runs through this book, is the themes between the followers of Odin and the followers of Thor. And Egil is definitely a follower of Odin. And it's really interesting. And that also ties into the berserkers. And the berserkers are people who you really don't want to cross. If you had berserkers on your ship, you would have to put your ship ashore so that they could go ashore and wrestle with big boulders. Because if they didn't get their energy out that way, they would just start killing people on the crew. They would gnaw on their shields before they went into battle. So there was really somebody that you wanted to think twice about whether you wanted them with you. And supposedly Egil had berserker blood running through his veins. He wasn't a berserker himself, but he had berserker ancestry in him. So how does he write this poem? What does this poem come about? Well, he's on Viking, and he sees a Viking longship of one of his enemies, Eric the Red, Eric Bloodaxe. And so he attacks them on the seas. They go onto the ship. They cut the mainsail. The mainsail drops over the crew, and he slays all of Eric's kinsmen on this ship, including Eric's 10-year-old son, the prince, and just kills them in this ignominious way. They can't fight back. They're helpless, and they just put this sail over the top of them, and they murder all of them. And then Egil goes and he curses Eric the Red with a curse that says it will force him to drive him from his kingdom in the mainland across the seas and then into England, where he will have to relinquish his kingdom on the mainland. And that comes to pass. So as you can imagine, Eric the Red, Eric Bloodaxe, is not happy with Egil. He's his ultimate blood enemy. So years later, after these feuds where he's murdered all of his kinsmen, including his son, there's a storm that drives Egil's ship onto shore in England, where Eric Bloodaxe has had to make his new kingdom because of the curse. And Eric gets a hold of and captures Egil, and it just is furious with him, as you can imagine, and is going to kill him. They're going to kill him that night, except that it's considered bad luck to have somebody executed in the night, so they're going to wait for morning in order to do the execution. And during the night, Egil crafts the Head Ransom poem, which is a poem praising Eric Bloodaxe. And in the morning when they bring him out, he goes in front of the king and he recites this poem. And Eric Bloodaxe sits bolt upright in his throne, listens to it, and is so impressed by it. And this poem has so much value to him that even though Egil has committed all these atrocities and these murders against his family and driven him out of his homeland, he releases Egil and lets him go free. And hence the name of it as the Head Ransom poem. And this is a real poem. It was written by Egil Skallagrimsson. It is the second recorded poem in Western literature that uses end rhyming in the stanzas. So it's historically significant from a literary standpoint. The first poem that uses end rhyming was written by Skallagrim, Egil's father. So he learned it from his father, and then he writes it in this second poem using the end rhyming. And it's just a wonderful poem. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to read you guys the poem now. And if you don't want to listen to poetry, you can tune out now. It's on page 158, but I would ask you to give it a shot. It's 2.5 pages. It starts up here. You can see how short these stanzas are. And then it goes across the next page. All right, I lied. It's 4.5 stanzas. So we've got 4.5 stanzas of poetry coming up. Please, I hope you guys tune in for it. Stay tuned for it. Give it a shot. Let me get a drink here to wet my whistle before I start reading, and we'll go through it. All right, here we go. Egil Skallagrimsson saving his rock helm of the head with the Head Ransom poem for King Eric Bloodaxe. By sun and moon I journeyed west, my sea-born tune from Odin's breast. My songship packed with poet's art, its word keel cracked the frozen heart. And now I feed with an English king, so to an English king all word me'd bring. Your praise my task, your song my fame. If you but ask, I'll sound your name. These praises, king, won't cost you dear, that I shall sing if you will hear, who beat and blazed your trail of red till Odin gazed upon the dead. The scream of swords, the clash of shields, these are true words on battlefields. Man sees his death frozen in dreams, but Eric's breath frees battle streams. The warlord weaves his web of fear, each man receives his fated share. Our blood-red sons the warrior's shield, the eagle scans the battlefield. As edged swing blades cut men down, Eric the king earns his renown. Break not the spell, but silent be, to you I'll tell their bravery. At clash of kings on Carrion Field, the red blade swings at blue-stained shield. When swords anoint, what man is saved, who gets this point is deep engraved. And men like oak from Odin's tree, few words they spoke at that iron play. The edges swing, blades cut men down, Eric the king earns his renown. The ravens dined at this red fair, blood on the wind, death in the air. The Scotsman's foes fed wolves their meat, death ends their woes as eagles eat. Carrion birds fly thick to the body stack, for eyes to pick and flesh to hack. The raven's beak is crimson red, the wolf goes seek his daily bread. The sea wolves lie and take their ease, but feast the sly wolf overseas. Valkyries keep the troops awake, there is little sleep when shield walls shake. When arrows fly the top bow string to bite or lie with broken wing. The peace is torn by flying spears, when bows are drawn, wolves prick their ears. The yew-bow shrills, the edges bite, the warrior wills his men to fight. His arrow fly like swarms of bees to feast the sly wolf overseas. I praise the king throughout his land and keenly sing his open hand. His hand so free with golden spoil, but vice like he grips his own soil. Bracelets of gold he breaks in two and uncontrolled pours gifts on you. The lavish king loads you with treasure, and everything is for your pleasure. On his gold arm the bright shield swings, to his foes harm, to his friends rings. His fame's a feast of glorious war, his name sounds east from shore to shore. And now, my lord, you've listened long, as word on word I've built this song. Your source is war, your streams are blood, but my springs pour great Odin's flood. To praise my lord, this tight mouth broke, the word floods poured, the still tongue spoke. From my poet's breast these words took wing, now all the rest may learn to sing. And that song saved the life of Egil Skallagrimsson and got him released. And with that, I'm going to say take care, be safe, and I'll catch you all in the future.